Welcome to Cosmic Roadmap. I'm your host, Melissa Lamport, Reiki astrogeo guide and best-selling author. Have you ever wondered where in the world you should be? This podcast is about bridging cultures and helping the endless wanderer find their purpose and place in the world. Hear stories from digital nomads, avid travelers, and aspiring globetrotters, and learn how they discovered where they were destined to be and build their legacy. If you're curious about astrogeography and where you're meant to be on the planet, go to cosmicroadmap.com to download your free passport to purpose. My special guest today is Tiffany Pettit. She is a powerhouse when it comes to metaphysical knowledge. By taking the time to go back to the roots of many of these ancient practices, she understands not only their modern uses and interpretations, but also their original meanings and uses as well. Crafting her offerings as skillfully as a composer writes a symphony, Tiffany creates vivid and insightful experiences for every step of your journey. She demystifies astrology and energy work, especially for Magickal Mamapreneurs that want to unleash their best selves. So she is also a wife to a Scorpio Libra Moon husband and a mama to 2 Pisces Aquarius Sun babies. And we were lucky enough to meet through a mutual mentor, Magickal. And we initially met through her story medicine workshop, and then later through her Roots to Rise program. You can definitely listen back to episode 12 for my conversation with Magickal. So welcome, Tiffany.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for being on. How has your life been since our astrogeo session? That was quite a while back. It was like May 2021. So yeah, how has it enlightened your life, and especially like your astrology offerings?
Yeah, so it's actually been really insightful because it's helped me like really understand how these lines have influenced me growing up. And then it's also influenced me now to my offerings because of the fact that like I realize this is something that we should take into account because it's kind of like a unseen force per se, because it's not something that's like obvious on an astrology chart. So it's like a separate map and a separate information per se. So
Exactly. Because yeah, so many people are like, oh, you do birth chart readings. And like, technically not. Yeah, it's a little different. And yeah, just go a little deeper into how you got into astrology, like how you help mama and the work that you do. Because you also do energy healing, and that's how we connected. Because I do Reiki, and yeah, we instantly hit it off because we did something similar, but in yeah, it was still separate because I do maps and you do charts, but now you're trying to weave that together as well.
yeah, and so I just like, as being like moms, we have, I feel like a lot of times, I mean, generally speaking, people, we carry so much trauma due to certain situations that growing up. And so like for me, part of my thing was learning myself and understanding like what I had gone through, and like using that to help my children. And I also wanted to allow other moms to have access to that. And so by doing that, we can help the newer generation by better understanding themselves. So I wanted to give them the tools. And so astrogeography was like another tool to use because I'm a Virgo. I'm all about like using all the tools that you have out there and like taking what you can to better improve things. And so this was just another layer to all the things that I had already known. Reiki, it can help remove energy, help you bolster energy. So it has its own particular uses on like helping different astrological influences as well. So yeah.
Right. And how have you noticed the particular planetary energies? I know that you mentioned there's a few Chiron lines, right? A recent trip that you took. How did that affect you, and how did you feel on those lines?
So down around Panama City Beach, because I live in Georgia.
Yeah.
So that's like the close local beach.
Yeah.
I have to the west of it, I have a Chiron MC line, and then like going right through that beach area is a Chiron square ascendant. And so for me, that energy was so healing in regards to me accepting my body, because like, we have this specific way of how women should look in society today. Like, oh, you should shave, you should have makeup and look nice, have your hair, skinny,
Right.
and all these particulars. And I was like, I hate shaving.
Yeah.
And so I was like, screw this.
Like
And
hair
so
is
it was just
normal.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's normal. And it's just like being a mom, you have children and you're like, oh my God, they have hair. And everybody's like, children are hairless. And you're like, no, they're not. And it's just like, this is something natural. It's normal. And so like Chiron, when I was down there, I was just like, this doesn't even matter. Like, why do people so obsessive with it? And it's just like, it was so healing for me being down there because I was like, this is my body. I can, represent it however I want. If it bothers someone else, that's their issue. It's
Mhm.
not mine. If I'm comfortable not shaving and I'm still clean, I feel like when people see it, it's like, oh, they're not clean. They're dirty hippies kind of feel. And it's just
Right.
like, dude, no, it's natural hair. Guys have it and it's not even.
Can I have something?
Sorry. Okay, but you're gonna have to go ask you, okay? Sorry. And so it's just something that's so natural and normal that like you look at guys and you don't even think anything of their natural hair. But it's like for
Right.
women, it's like, oh my gosh, heaven forbid,
Yes,
So
yes. Yeah. So you really felt like it allowed you to go deeper into yourself and heal that,
yeah.
like the self-care part of it or self-love part of it. So I love that.
Yeah.
And you also have a moon line in West Cambodia. So you are half Cambodian.
Yes.
And how has that connection been healing and like connecting back to your roots?
Well, actually I noticed this not too long ago because my mom had started watching like Cambodian movies and songs and videos like about Cambodia again.
Yeah.
And I was just spending time with her. And like the moon, it represents the mother. So like it was healing this connection. And like we don't have the best connection. So my line through that area is a moon trine MC. And so this was like, I could see it so easily. And it was just, we were
And the
good
MC
natured.
usually is like about the future, right? Like the future.
Well,
and
the
like things
public, it's the public
expanding.
eye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's things that are very obvious, very apparent,
Right.
because it's the highest point of the sun. So it is things that are highly illuminated.
Right.
And so like, I was just like watching it happen, like, oh my gosh. I was like, because at first I was kind of skeptical about how the lines worked when you weren't actually there, but like really seeing that obvious influence, I was like, oh my gosh.
Right.
Yes.
By just incorporating, like watching a
Mhm.
film, right? Incorporating
Mhm.
these elements into your life. Because I usually recommend like watching documentaries or incorporating like crystals, right, from a certain place. And we were even
Yeah.
chatting at one point, like bringing sand back, right, from a
Yes,
beach.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
to tap into the energy. So yeah, I love that. And yeah, so how did you get into astrology and energy work? Were you doing something else? Did you go to school for something else? How did it shift into like, this is what I'm gonna do? It's like I'm just gonna be, Tiffany Magickal Emporium.
So it's actually kind of as a Virgo child, I was
Mhm.
always snooping. I was always curious and I loved researching, learning new things. And so I was diving through my dad's books in the basement one day, and he has, stacks of books down there. And I happened upon Linda Goodman's Sun Signs, and it was like one of those older hardbound blue copies. The cover's falling apart now, but it's like I was so enamored by it. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And I just, reading,
Right.
because I was already a vivid or avid reader, not vivid, but avid
Right.
reader. And so I soaked up all the knowledge and I was so fascinated by it.
Mhm.
But it, it's not schoolwork. So it was always pushed off to the side, but it always stuck with me and it's always fascinated me. And it allowed me to better know myself. And it turned out that I am actually an INFP. So for those of you who don't know what that is, that's like a healer empath who's like really into knowing themselves and understanding the world.
Okay.
And so I realized astrology was that entry point for me. It was my gateway to it. And it was like, it's literally almost like a drug for me. Like so much knowledge came through it. And so I was just like, I just soaked it up because I'm always wanting to learn. And that for me was it was perfect.
Yeah. And it was so amazing that your dad had that book. Like, how did that even happen? Was that his
So,
book, or it just so
yeah,
happened?
yeah. It was his book. And so, and like he had an ephemeris, which like tells you like the different times when the planets move. So like I know at some point in his life he was interested in it.
Okay.
Like, and he also had written poetry. Not that he would probably admit that, but you know, because my dad's like he's a engineer, he's a computer engineer, you know,
Right.
straight science and math, only facts. That's a
Right.
hobby. You don't do that, you know.
Yeah. So
But
he
it's
put
like,
aside his astrology book
yeah.
like
And
way
because
back there.
he's a Pisces moon. And so like, you know,
Oh,
there's some depth there. And but it's just
yes.
like it's not acknowledged.
Right.
And
It's
so
more in
as
the in the intimate phase, right? And yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he's a Scorpio. So
Mm,
there's this guardedness around who he is, who his perception to the world is.
right.
So yeah, it was just this like, I think guarded thing. And so like as a child, for me was my access point, even if it's something that he, you know, turned away from. For me, him having that was just my entryway, and it was just absolutely wonderful to fall into because I've never looked back, and now I'm like fully embracing it. And how I moved into energy work was is that happened to find Reiki. I don't even remember how, but you know, I've always been fascinated by the idea of magic, and I've always had this great belief in it. There was never a point in time where like I didn't really think it was real. I was always that child who believed in it.
Mm,
And it was this fascination, like, how do I tap into this, you know? And I did on just like that straight personal energy magical level. And for me, when I found Reiki, I was like, oh my gosh, yes. But I didn't really have access to it. You know, I didn't know any teachers, I didn't get out like
right.
that. And it turned out that someone I had previously dated, thanks to my Venus line,
Yes.
he had actually gone through a really bad accident where he got hit with a car and
Wow.
like almost, you know, died. Saw, you know, that kind of afterlife state, and then came back and ended up finding Reiki, and it helped heal him incredibly.
Right.
And
Especially with
so
the
he actually
trauma and
mhm,
whatever was, yeah.
yeah. And so, and he's also a fellow Asian, he's Filipino. And so like we
Okay.
kind of connected on that front, but he actually had like a message from his spirits and to saying like, hey, you should talk to Tiffany again and see if she wants to do Reiki. And I had been looking for it. And then so he came into my life and was like, hey, by the way, you know, I'm a Reiki teacher now. Are you interested? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, yes, yes. And you know, the opportunity came and I jumped
Yes.
at it. And so I was just like, wow. And then like next thing I know, 3 months later, I'm a Reiki master. And I was just like, I like full hardcore head dived into it. And so that opened it. Thank you, Bear. And so that just, you know, opened that door to energy healing. And then I got back into feng shui, just another type of energy work. And so I'm not perfect at it, but I am learning and I love the concepts. And it's just like, tweak this little area, you know, or tweak this little area, go spend time in this area, and boom, you have all this different types of energies happening, and you can influence your whole life just by shifting a couple little things.
Yeah, and I haven't really dove into feng shui. How can you incorporate that into astrology, or does it complement it well?
So actually, feng shui is based upon its own astrology system within
Wow.
China. So feng shui is based upon the 9-star qi system. And this is like a really old system. You have 9 houses, and it's based upon numbers and the elements and stuff. And so different elements from like the classical Greek, they have 5 elements, but they're more, they call them changes, or because they're like a process, it's a constant transformation. Because if you think of yin and yang, it's constantly moving, changing,
Okay.
shifting, flowing. And so feng shui is based upon this, and we all have our numbers. And I'm actually going to be talking about that in the future, so
Okay.
something to
Awesome.
look out for, because it is a much more complicated process in the fact that it is completely different than the astrology systems that we know. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, because the only way that I've seen it been used, like more in interior design, right? But
Mhm.
it can be used with like the placement of a house, right? Or like
Yes,
the
yes.
environment, yeah,
Mhm.
the elements. So
Yeah.
yeah, Very, very
Because
interesting.
originally it was for, they used feng shui as setting up burial sites. Like that was its original intention. And then
Mhm.
eventually it became used for the house. And so by doing that, you ended up being able to influence your life. They ended up figuring that out. So similar to the houses that we have in astrology, the Western astrology chart, like we have 12 houses.
Mhm.
Over there, they have 9 or
Okay.
8 really with like a centerpiece. So
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear more about that. So you did mention your Venus sign and how living in Atlanta, you were born in California and have always gone back and forth, but in Atlanta, you have your Venus sign and you've been tapping into that line most of your life, and it's brought on a lot of relationships. So how has that been?
Yes. So I actually have, my Venus AC is like my major line over to the east. And then, excuse me, my Venus square MC is like straight through Atlanta. And so I live just a little north of Atlanta, and it's just like, relationships have been so hard for me.
Yeah.
Bear. Okay. I need you to be quiet, please. Okay. All right. So it connected me to lots of different people within my life. And I was always constantly searching for this love relationship of like, there's a partner out there for me. And, I've always been hopeful. I've always been looking for it. And I was thinking, oh, this person could be the next person. This person could be the next person. Like, or this next person could be the one, you know what I mean? And so it was just like, I would always head dive into relationships, and it was almost like obsessive with it. And due to this huge influence, like I was like, oh, maybe it's just mainly the trauma with my parents of like lack of emotional support. And it was just like, I was always looking for this person to connect with. And that influence really came strongly through these Venus lines. With a square, it's a difficult aspect. It is a very difficult, tense aspect. I actually just posted about that on my Instagram, about because these challenging aspects, people look at them as like the end of the world.
Right.
And so like a lot of times, if we might see like, oh my gosh, I'm living under a very difficult, disharmonious aspect, it's like, oh, how do I get out of this? But it's actually like an opportunity for growth. And that's something that like I realized, like every relationship that I had, I looked at it as like, oh, this is okay. I'm learning more of what I want, what I don't want, who I want to be with, who I don't want to be with, red flags, green flags. And it was just like, it created these layers, and it was a lot of friction. It was a lot of conflict. But at the same time, I was confident that it was leading me to where I was supposed to be. And so like, that's something that seeing, even though it's not like a major line, seeing that minor line and looking at it and like, okay, I'm under a difficult line. How can this help me? And seeing that after knowing all of this about myself, it was just like, wow, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense to how I've been living, why I've been so obsessed with the relationships in some sense. And it's like, it ended up being like a big part of who I was. Like that was something that people knew about me. Like I was always constantly in a relationship. Like there were very few times where I wasn't in a relationship. It was like maybe not official, but there was like someone I was with. And so I was always on this energy of Venus connecting to love. So yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that with the disharmonious lines or those difficult lines, because I do tell my clients, like, even though it is a disharmonious line, it can allow that growth, right? That ability to expand and learn lessons from it. And it almost picks at you where, if there is a misalignment in your life, it immediately, puts a spotlight on that particular issue that you may have, or that misalignment. So I tell my clients, like, it's okay to go to that place or to be in that place. Just realize that it's like a little thorn on your side, and to really be in alignment with your purpose and like what you're meant to be doing, because it'll definitely come back to you in some way. So how has the Mars line, you've been going back and forth to California, that's a very fiery energy. Like how do you bring that back, where you live in Atlanta and most of your life?
So I've actually been strongly connected to this line, even like when not visiting there. I'm always like, oh, I'm from California. Like it was always like face first, like I'm from California. This is who I am.
Yeah.
I'm
And
Californian.
I thought you were yeah, you were like originally, which you were born, but you told me like 4 years old, you were like, you were out of there.
Mhm.
But I guess the influence
Yeah.
from going back and like still having family there, you definitely still
Mhm.
carry that energy, that Cali
Yes,
energy.
yes. And so like I always mention to people like, oh, I'm not from Georgia. Like that was a thing. Like I was raised here. I was, I grew up here, but like I'm not Georgian. Like I never said y'all until like 3-4 years ago.
Right.
And it was so weird the first time I said it, but I was just like, y'all, oh. I was like, that is not a Californian thing. And I held on to that identity because that was, for me, it was part of who I am. That was where I was from. And despite the fact that like I was raised in Georgia, I didn't really mesh with the energy and the people here. I felt
Right.
out of place. I grew up in a predominantly white and black neighborhood area.
Mhm.
And so it was like mostly white and then black and then like where are the Asians? There are
Yeah.
like no Asians around here. And
Right.
so like there was only like one other Asian kid that I knew of in high school, and like he was adopted. And so it was just like, all right, I'm on my own here. And it's like I'm half white, I'm half Asian, and it was like all the Asian people were in California for me.
Right. So you
So
still
like
had that strong tie back to your
yeah.
your homeland
Mhm.
essentially, right?
Yeah. And so all my cousins are there. Well, not all of them. I later learned in like 2019 when I went to Cambodia, I had more family over there. Didn't know. Or 2009. Sorry, that was 2009 the first time I
Mhm.
went. Connecting to this Mars energy. It's my Mars AC line in California. Like oh my gosh, I was so ballsy as a child. Like I was the daredevil child. I could play with the boys, playing kickball. I got hit in the neck one time with a football. I remember that.
Right.
But
Because that
I was like
Mars
always
energy is all
running
about
around.
being like fierce and like,
Yeah, I was such a tomboy.
Mm.
And I also realized that had related to like the 9-star chi numbers that I have, but because I had such young energy when I was younger. And so like I think I that's why I so strongly connected to that Mars energy that I have there in California. And I was so aggressive with my parents, like you couldn't tell me nothing. I was always ready for a fight. It was just like I invited so much conflict into my life by this. But at the same time, by doing that and understanding that, it actually drove me to stand up for myself at
Right.
times.
To
And
have that conviction, right? Yeah.
yeah. And
Right.
so in Mars in my chart literally sets right on my ascendant. And so like I'm a Virgo rising, but like Mars is so apparent because I'm just like head first into things. And it's like I was like, I was saying I'm head first into relationships, head first into learning about astrology. It's like I just straight dive into things. And that
Right.
is that Mars energy. And so like having it sitting right there on my ascendant, it really is a part of who I am. It has such a strong influence in me. And so like I think having that identity with California was that strong connection for me. So yeah.
I love it. And how are you incorporating astrogeography into your sessions now? Because that's
Mhm.
actually adding a lot of depth. I know that I work with
Yeah.
a lot of like digital nomads, essentially like figuring out like what their next place is, but how are you
Mhm.
incorporating it with their birth chart and
Yeah.
really complementing their birth chart
Mhm.
readings?
Yeah. So I heavily dive into like the natal chart.
Yeah.
And so because this really represents who we are, but adding that layer of an astrogeography line is like an unseen information, that like we don't see in the chart, like I mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
And so like for me, having that Venus line or those Venus lines that I'm near, and then the Chiron line that it's kind of close, but it's a little further away, um, really just like let me understand like, oh, Venus, love, relationships, Chiron, ooh, healing, done lots of it, ended up being a healer, and so in looking at other people and seeing how those influence where they are, and because it's not something that they're aware of. We look at the chart to understand that, but
Mhm.
it's not like, oh, hey, you've got this line right here, this has been influencing you for such and such time of your life or all your life. And so taking that into account, where they've lived, where they were born, where they currently live, it helps them to understand, oh my gosh, yeah, while I was there, I had to deal with such and such energy. And it's like,
Right.
okay, that makes so much sense because I wasn't really seeing it in my chart, maybe, because in the astrology chart, there's different parts active at different times, but being under an astrogeo line is like a constant subtle background program where it's just constantly operating, but you just not always aware of it. It's like, what are you always aware of on the background programs of your computer? Like, yeah, we know it's running, but like, we don't know specifically, okay, it's running this and this to make it work,
Exactly.
unless you're like a computer engineer, like my dad.
Set up an algorithm, just
right. It's like, okay, this is always running here, but like, so this just adds that layer, and it helps us to better understand the influence. It's just, it's another cosmic influence into our life besides the natal chart. Like, that's a constant snapshot of like what we're dealing with for the rest of our lives. And just having the astrogeo lines is like, oh, okay, I can tap into that. Or you can mitigate it by going to a line that might, help deter it in some way. Like on my phone, I actually have a picture of Hawaii. And then on my inner home screen, I have a picture of Kyoto, Japan. And so like, I'm connecting to those two lines there, and that's kind of helping me. I have in the Hawaii, I have a healing line, the Chiron line. And so in Kyoto, I have like I think it was a Jupiter line or something. And so, helping to mitigate the other energies that I have and allowing me to focus on other stuff. So yeah.
And what is your stance on like when things are in retrograde? If you go to a particular, like a positive Mercury line or a positive Saturn line, do you think that helps to mitigate that energy, right? That retrograde energy?
So
to kind of bring you into harmony, right? During those times.
Yeah. I think it's always good to tap into them, because when a planet's retrograde, their energy is more intense, which is why like when we get Mercury retrogrades, everything goes super wonky.
Right.
And so it's an intensification of that energy. So yeah, I think going to align at that time or tapping into it can help you to better understand the energies, especially like we just had a planet go retrograde. I think Neptune?
Saturn.
I think Saturn. Was it Saturn?
Well, the one that we're in right now is Saturn, right? Saturn retrograde until about the fall time.
Yeah. We have Saturn, and I think Pluto's retrograde, and I think Neptune might have just gone retrograde. Recently. I have to double check. So like tapping into those lines, we can help to better understand them, because like especially Neptune brings out realities, and it can be really harsh because Neptune deals with illusions. And so like
it's all
maybe
like really
tapping
heady.
into those. And it's just like a lot of times it's about dreams and confusion. It's foggy, and it's just like all of a sudden you get retrograde and it's like snap back to reality, and and it's just like, oh, okay, this is wasn't ready for this. And so like tapping into that line, especially a harmonious aspect or like the major Neptune line, could really help to influence and just be like, ooh, okay, it's not super harsh, I get it, okay, I see what's happening here, clarity, a little less harsh, so,
right.
Yeah.
And what are some recommendations that you've already mentioned, like pictures, like having them on your phone? I usually recommend like the six senses, right? Going through the basic five senses, and then visualization or meditation as one of the ways to connect to these energies. What are your favorite ways to connect?
Well, for me, at least like for Cambodia and like it's my moon line, like my food, my mom always makes the food. And that's something that like I love seeing about your timeline or your story is, it's always the different foods that you have. And I was like, so enamored. I'm just like, oh, look at all this. And so I think food is really like an easy way to connect, because we live in such a diverse food world now. We have such easy access in most places in, the US. And it's just like, you can go down the street and have Mexican, or you could go down the other street and have like Indian or Southern barbecue. It's just like you have all these different easy access points, but also music is a big thing for me. That's part of my human design, is like high music and sound. And so for me, that like really strongly influences me, especially as an INFP too. Like I'm getting into that deep emotional state allows me to connect. So yeah.
All right, awesome. So you prefer hearing and also like the visuals and food, because that's so nurturing for our bodies. So how can people work with you? And you work with a variety of communities, but also especially mompreneurs, right?
Yes, yeah, because I am a stay-at-home, working home mom
Yes.
myself. So this is something that like I wanted to encourage other mothers to have access to. So yeah, find me on Instagram, Tiffany's Magical Emporium, or on my website, afrokamai.com. And so yeah, I have my offerings for natal chart readings, shui, Reiki, and I also have my Afrokamai Magical Academy coming out at the beginning of Leo season, where we'll be talking about astrology and all my fun insights to it and allowing people to help better understand it through the demystification of it. So, because I feel like people have such great overwhelm coming in. And so as a Virgo, we got to break it down.
Yes. So you have so one-on-one offerings, and also is that going to be a group program?
It's just going to, it's like it's a course access, basically pre-recorded, and having like charts we'll go through and stuff like that. And then I'm still considering doing like live sessions, but right now it's currently just like a pre-recorded course. So you guys can go in and just like tap in, dive into the information as you want. So yeah.
Okay, amazing. So definitely follow Tiffany. She is amazing. I had a session with her, and just all the insights that she gave me, and all the different type of astrology that she knows. It's just, it shows that it's a testament of who you are as a Virgo, right? So thank you so much for being on today. And remember, lineage goes beyond your ancestors. You are meant to connect to the cosmos so you may finally find your cosmic family. Until next time. Thank you for listening to Cosmic Roadmap. If you would like to book a session with me to explore your own cosmic roadmap and chart your next destination in business, love, and life, then head over to cosmicroadmap.com.